Right now is the chairman of the House Committee on Financial Services, Jeb Hensarling of Texas. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Would you like to see a rollback of Dodd-Frank attached to any tax plan?
Oh, I'd like to see it attached to any bill that moves across Congress.
Yeah.
So fundamental tax reform is so critical to our economy, but so is regulatory reform. And our Speaker, Paul Ryan, has called the Financial Choice Act, which effectively repeals and replaces Dodd-Frank, the crown jewel of our regulatory efforts. So we've passed it in the House with only one dissenting Republican vote. Unfortunately, we're still awaiting action in the Senate. But I look for any opportunity to advance both tax reform and regulatory reform. We're going to look at the appropriations process. We're looking at what the Senate can do. But it's an important part of releasing capital in our society. And tax reform will be important, but so is regulatory reform.
Yeah, for sure. And already we've seen, as a result of the president's executive orders on regulation, peeling back certain regulations, we're seeing the economy actually respond. And companies, loosen up their purse strings to invest more in durable goods type things and big ticket items. 3.1% GDP this last week. Tell me what else you would like to see in this tax plan. Are you happy with the current form, this framework that the leadership has released?
Well, again, if I could harken back, you're right, 3.1% GDP growth is not by accident. I mean, we've got a president who has already rolled back hundreds of rules, used the Congressional Review Act 14 times, to roll back onerous Obama regulations where it had only been used once. So this president really is poised to be the deregulation president since the most deregulation since President Reagan. With respect to the tax reform plan, I cannot envision a plan that I would not end up supporting. I'm very excited, as is all Republicans, at this prospect of having a fairer, flatter, simpler, more competitive tax code. And by reducing both the C-Corp rates on businesses, I think this economy is poised yet again for 3, maybe 3.5% economic growth. So again, this is a framework, this is an outline, but I think they are off to a great start.
Well, the Committee for a Responsible Budget says that these tax cuts are going to cost $2.2 trillion. So the question then becomes, how do you pay for it? Do you need this to be revenue neutral? Gary Cohn, who was just with us, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin have said many times that they are expecting growth to pay for this in a big way. Do you think that's achievable?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure there's any time in America's history in the last century where we haven't had fundamental long-term tax reform that hasn't generated both economic growth and more revenues. You can go back to the Reagan tax cuts. There were 3 different tax cuts, and we had 4% sustained economic growth. In 1984, I think it was 7% economic growth. And when President Reagan left office, revenues were 19% higher. You can go back to the Kennedy tax relief. You can go all the way back to the Coolidge tax relief. Right. And so what we see is revenue feedback. It's not just theory that I have.
Yeah, it's
economic history.
I was talking with Senator Ted Cruz about this last week, and he points out that in 1984, the GDP was 7.3%, which is like China numbers. I mean, we haven't seen that in so long. We forgot that that's actually achievable living in this 1% and 2% growth world. Infrastructure package. Gary Cohn just told me during the commercial break, actually, that an infrastructure package is ready now. And you can also attach that to a tax plan should you need to do so to get the votes required to pass this thing. What would you like to see? Do you want to just do a clean tax reform package like the framework says now, or do you want to have this unraveling of Dodd-Frank or an infrastructure package attached to it?
Well, the important thing right now is to get the votes to get the tax reform package done. That's
well, you don't have the votes, though, on the state and income tax deduction, right?
Well, I don't know that. What I hope is that people will look at what is the difference in take-home pay between a 1.7% GDP economy and a 3 to 3.5% GDP economy. And so I hope that people will look at that, a generous doubling of the standard deduction. There are all types of provisions in this outline. They're going to help working families, middle-income families. But the most important aspect of this is a tax reform plan built for economic growth. I hope in some respects people look at the entire painting and not a few brushstrokes in the corner. If you look at the entirety of the plan, I have no doubt, again, based upon economic history, that we are once again capable of 3% plus economic growth. You know, Maria, we've essentially come out of a lost decade from the years of Obamanomics. And so the average middle-income family is probably $14,000, achieving $14,000 less in income than they otherwise would have had we had sustained 3% economic growth. That's what I hope all my colleagues will focus on, and that is the tax plan built for economic growth that will bring jobs back to America, capital back to America, and lead to not just more jobs, but bigger paychecks and greater take-home pay.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? The wages, which haven't moved in so many years. Congressman, it's good to see you, sir. Thanks very much.